All right, our talk is titled, Do You Have a Strategy That No One Uses? Leverage Strategic Custody. Our speaker has spent 15 years in product management, working with companies like Smart Recruiters, PwC, and Google, with a mission to find the answer to a very important question. What can we learn by following our curiosity, embracing the unknown, and creating amidst chaos? Well, the answer so far? Good product management that achieves strategic outcomes is possible through dancing with curiosity and chaos. Let me welcome to the stage the amazing Adam Thomas, directly from New York.
Wow, that's an impressive sound. It's like the voice of God. Listen to me, right? So I just want to do a quick thing with folks here. My talk's a bit interactive, and so I want everyone in here to grab a partner. If it's a person in your row, just find somebody to sit and chat with, because there's going to be a bit of chatting during this conversation. I want to make sure that folks have time to chat. The other thing is, at the end of this talk, I'm going to ask for feedback, so please, when you have a moment, I'd love to know what you think. Give you guys a second to settle. Let's begin. If a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound? No, it doesn't. Not in our case. As product people, it's really important that whatever we do can't be silent. It can't be ignored. So one day I was looking up some numbers about strategy, and I ran across this white paper from Harvard Business School. And they talked about how businesses meet half of their outcomes 48% of the time. And 90% of the time, businesses whose strategies, they have strategies that fail. I'm guessing this sounds familiar because you're here, right? Like most people have strategies or a strategy that they've used in the past that has completely fallen on its face. And at best, maybe it's accomplished one or two things. And here are a few questions I want you to think about as we go through this, right? Why do strategies fail? Well, I have three questions that I pose when we talk about strategy. One, does the team you work with know the strategy? Think about this for a moment. If you ask somebody on your team, what's the strategy? What are we doing, right? Could they give you a clear answer? Second, do the people that you work with understand how to apply that strategy on a daily basis, right? Do they know how that strategy is going to affect their work or the decisions that they make? Third, if they have the strategy and they know how it affects them, do they have a method of improving the strategy based on what they see on the ground? We're human beings, and human beings need to feel like they are attached to something in order to follow it long term. Because as product managers, we work in teams, right? No product person does anything alone. If you are doing something alone, something is wrong. And so it's really important that the work that we do, the strategies that we use in order to help our teams get better or make better decisions over time, connect. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about strategic custody, because we want our strategy to be done well, and we want it to count. What is strategic custody? Strategic custody is the art of keeping strategy alive, open to change, and operational. By the end of this talk, you'll know how to identify strategy. This will help you communicate to the teams around you. You'll be able to identify if a strategy you're using is alive or dead. And let me give you the answer. If no one's using your strategy, it's dead. And you'll have some tactics to help your team iterate on that strategy. As I mentioned before, having people connect with the strategy A part of that connection is going to come through iteration and people feeling like their input is heard. And so you're going to have some tools in order to do that. We'll walk through this in 3 sections. The first section is going to be about definition. What is strategy? I want you to leave this room today with the idea of what strategy is. We have a cohesive thing, right? We can go back to our teams and use. Second, we're going to be talking about alive or dead. I used to call this talk zombie strategy at one point, right? Because a lot of us have zombie strategies that are in Google Drive, and that's where they live, right? And then lastly, we're going to talk about how can we build. How do we build on our strategy in order to make it better? So let's start with section 1. What is strategy? Strategy focuses on the big problem. What is the problem that we're trying to rally around? If you talk to your teams and they can't tell you what the problem is, we have work to do. We'll talk about why problems are big in a bit. Next, it sets the context. Why is this a problem? What are the stakes? What have we tried before? Gives people a sense of history. So those who have gone through and tried to solve the problem before know that their work wasn't done in vain. We also have to tell people, why are we attempting to do what we're attempting to do? What's the stake, right? Does it mean we lose market position, or does it mean the company is going under, right? Those are 2 different stakes. But if people don't know what the stakes are, they don't know how to dedicate their energies to it. And ultimately, it lets us know what we intend to overcome. What are the bets that we're willing to take to overcome this problem that we see? Ultimately, all 3 of those things give you the power to decide, right? Strategies are all about decision. In fact, the Latin root of decision is desire, to cut. And so if your strategy is not allowing you to cut things that aren't important, then it's not quite the strategy you need. So quick show of hands, who's cut something away from the tactical level based on strategy before? Right? It's about 10% of the room, right? And I'm sure the people that raise their hands will tell you, that's the biggest piece. That's the most important thing, because that strategy gives you the ammunition to go to other people and say, hey, this is why we cut this, right? It's going to stop us from doing A and B is way more important than C, which we cut. And then that helps the conversation move for your teams to be able to do things. What if I can't make strategy? What if the CEO is here and the CEO says we have to do X? Happens all the time. It's a reality in what we do. I have some news for you. You can question, right? Questions are going to be the thing that's going to open up that conversation. And how are you going to question? How do you frame that question, right? The CEO gives you this, it's not paper, right? It's probably a bunch of ideas on maybe a whiteboard, maybe over Zoom, right? So how are you going to question that? Well, I love using this tool from Richard Rumelt. He wrote a fantastic book called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. And the tool is called the strategy kernel, right? And that tool is based around the idea of how Richard Rumelt sees good strategy. Good strategy honestly acknowledges the challenges being faced and provides an approach to overcoming them. So, the CEO sits you in a room, and they go, our strategy is right? Probably has some lagging indicator tag to it, right? I want to increase revenue, right? We all know revenue is not really the thing, right? But that's what they're going to tell you. So what do? Well, first you ask first you want to get an understanding of the diagnosis. What is the problem that we're trying to solve with the work that we're trying to do? This is the most important piece of the puzzle, because if you do not have clarity on the problem, then everything else pretty much goes away. And you want to anchor that with that CEO, because if the CEO understands the problem that is trying to be solved and is on board with you when the problem is trying to be solved, when bad things happen, you can always go back to that anchor point, right? When something bad happens, you can say, this happened, this failed, it was in pursuit of this problem. We're going to try X, Y, and Z that's going to go help with that problem. Next, you want to get a guiding policy. A guiding policy is how are we going to overcome this challenge, and how are we going to do it differently? Right, before you leave the room or that set of conversations with the CEO, it is really important for you to understand, how do we take on opportunity, right? What helps us make decisions, or what helps us cut things that are stopping us from that opportunity? That includes other products. That includes other initiatives, right? The ideal thing is you leave that room with a guiding policy that allows you to say, if I see X, we are open to cutting or giving resources or creating resources from any pool of Y, right, in order to make something happen. Right? The idea there is, if there is opportunity, we pounce on it. We don't want to be in the room thinking about, well, I don't know if that team is going to, or I don't know if this is going to help us, right? We need to be super clear about that. And lastly is coherent action. What's the action that we're going to take? What are the next few steps? Very easy to get this wrong, very easy to ignore kind of the first few things. But as much as it's important for us to know what the strategy is, we have to leave breadcrumbs for people to know how they're going to interact with it, how they're going to operate with it. And so when Engineer 7 looks at your strategy, it has to have some connection to real life. And so a coherent next step is going to give them that, right? And then they can help you formulate what's next. This is easily, you'll know when this is done well when you can enforce work in progress limits. Who in here has used WIP limits before? Quite a few. Some of the same people that had the strategy hands up, right? Because, right, when you have a clear strategy, you can say, hey, we're doing these three things. These three things are super important. This is what needs to be done. And if something comes out of nowhere from, a CEO that's ready to, pounce on something, you now have the room to say, okay, these three things are important, but this is clearly more important than these other things. Which one of these projects should be cut before we move forward, right? And if it's that important, like, we need to have these conversations in order to make things happen. I'll give you an example. When I was at Smart Recruiters, there was a project that came in that required a team 6 months, right? And it essentially got us out of our strategy. And so what happened before we had strategy is the CEO would send an email. The email would go to the VP of product. The VP of product would assign it to a portfolio. The portfolio would scramble and things would just go, right? With the strategy in place, that changed from we're just going to magically have it happen into, hey, let's have a conversation about this. Let's change what this is this important. Let's have a conversation of moving this product team away from whatever we have them doing, whatever you think is about to be done, to this project specifically. Is it worth that, right? It changes the tenure of the conversation so that the people up here understand what are the stakes, what is the problem, and the people that are working on it, right, your product managers, your product teams, can feel confident that they're not going to be overworked. They're not going to be expected to be in two places at once. So if you're going to, WIP limits are a great way of testing your strategy to see if it's clear and it's real. So first time to chat. 2 minutes, talk to the group or the little group that you have together, 2, 3 people, and talk about what the biggest problem your team is facing right now. Begin. 15 seconds. All right, in time. If you can hear me, clap, please. All right, thank you. Right. So earlier I talked about strategy being based on problems, not goals. Roger Martin, who wrote the book, this is cut off for some reason, but Playing to Win, which is a great strategy book, talks a lot about strategy. And one thing he says is strategy is the opposite of planning. Right? Why is that? I think about Ronnie Kohavi, who's ex-Microsoft, Amazon, Airbnb. He was the director of innovation. And he often talks about how the work that we do tends to not lead to the results that we want, right? Ideas move metrics in a neutral or negative way 60 to 90% of the time. So the work that we do is hardly ever right. Another way is from Mike Tyson. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth, right? As product teams, we get punched in the mouth a lot, right? We have experiments that fail. We have launches that don't quite work, right? We have org design issues. Strategy is your anchor that allows you to change. And if you have a problem, problems are an anchor, right? Problems allow you to say, this is what we're going after over the span of time. It's an anchor, and strategy is an anchor. So whenever any of these problems change, and whenever any of these things change and you have a problem, good strategy allows you the opportunity to take a look and focus on the big change, the anchor. And so the problem that I hope you had time to talk about, right, can be that anchor for you. So what is strategy, right? What did we learn? Strategy is the problem that we intend to solve, and strategy is not a goal, right? We also talked about the strategy kernel from Rumelt. Diagnosis, guiding policy, and coherent action. So your next action, after you leave this talk, I want you to go find out what your problem is. You started talking about it today. Spend some time after this talk, after you go back to the hotel room or your house, and just scribble out what the problem is that you're trying to solve, and make it clear. What's the big thing that you're trying to solve? And then go back to your team and ask them, what do they think the big problem is? And if you get different answers, that's a clue for you to go work on and make sure that that problem that is really the problem is understood and known through the team. Because again, our job as product managers is to make sure that we are helping our teams make the best decisions over time, and strategy is going to help us do that. Second, let's talk about alive or dead. Is my strategy alive or dead? Wow, this is wrong. Strategy is a forcing function. If it changes nothing, it's dead. Strategy is a forcing function. If it changes nothing, it is dead. Strategy is a forcing function. If it changes nothing, it is dead. I repeated that 3 times so you don't forget it. Because our role in product teams is to create an environment where the team is consistently making better decisions over time. And is your strategy alive or dead is a big piece of that, right? If it's dead and it's not affecting decision making, then how are you helping your team make better decisions over time? How many people have seen this screen before? 1 person. 2 people. Okay, great. I made a secret promise to myself. If 3 people knew it, then this whole talk is useless, so thank you for helping me. This is your reference screen for a document. In Google Docs, if you go check, there's 3 dots in the corner of your document there. You click it, and you check the reference to see who's there. If you work in a company, you'll be able to see the viewers, the comments, the sharing history. Essentially, you'll get to know everything about your document that you ever wanted to know. And the main thing you want to know is, are people using this? right? If people are using this, then there will be viewers. There will be a viewer trend. There will be comments. People will be sharing it. You can see who shares it with who. If it looks like this, and you just see your name, pretty sure your strategy is dead. It's in our dear, dear Google Drive graveyard, the place where all of our artifacts go, their final resting place. So, just a quick question. I just laid that on you. I would like for you to spend a couple minutes with your partner to talk about which documents you want to go check when you get back. What's important? What artifacts you need to know are being shared or not? So I'll see you in 2 minutes. All right, 1 minute. All right, raise your hand if you can hear me. We are done. We are done. Raise your hand. 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 Okay, great. Great. I hope everyone has a list of artifacts they're going to check. Right? Because a live strategy is always active, it's changing, it's shifting. You see comments, you see viewers, you see traction, versus a dead strategy, which is passive, reactive. It's not making people move, right? It becomes a zombie strategy. And so here are some things you can start to think about within your strategy to help a dead strategy shift over to an alive strategy. One is course correction. A live strategy iterates, dead strategy always starts from scratch. Change. A live strategy anticipates risks, dead strategy hides them. Value chain, right? A live strategy engages with the ecosystem, dead strategy engages with a point in time. Determination, and a live strategy makes bets, dead strategy knows the future. Customer needs. A live strategy evolves with the customer, dead strategy is static. And purpose. A live strategy has a clear, repeatable purpose. Dead strategy is muddled. So let's talk about these. Each. Course correction. Your strategy should have flexibility, right? And what I mean by flexibility is it shouldn't be so definite. We are going to do this, 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 and this, right? That starts to become a plan that is a chain, right? Strategy talks about direction. And so strategy should have some flexibility in the sense of concepts like scenario planning that says, when this happens, we will try X, right? Not this, 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 this. It's not a line, it's broken out into kind of optionality. Change. A live strategy anticipates risks, dead strategy hides them. Do you lay out what's wrong in your strategy up front? If you don't, when something bad happens, people start to find out. And rule number one of any person in product or consulting is do not let people find out about things, right? People finding out means people lose trust. If you lay out what the risks are when a strategy happens, when that thing happens, if it happens, people go, oh, that's been anticipated. Okay, we have an idea of what's happening. If it doesn't, then people go, I guess They're nervous. Value chain. A live strategy engages with the ecosystem. Dead strategy engages with the point in time. Who is affected by your strategy? Who are the stakeholders? What happens to them? Right? Do you have ways to talk to those stakeholders to make sure their language is reflected in your strategy? And in a few minutes, I'll give you a tool to do that, but I just want you to think about this right now. Does sales see themselves reflected in your strategy? Does customer success see themselves reflected in your strategy? Does engineering see itself reflected in your strategy? If not, right, why should they listen to it? Live strategy makes bets. You have an idea of what's going to happen in the future. You have an idea about risks. You have an idea about the value chain. What are we saying what might happen and why? Do you have space in your strategy to say what the bets are, what bets you're taking, what resources may look like in terms of the bet that you're taking? This will probably take one team. This may take 6 months, right? Do you have a sense of time to put down there? And then you add some flexibility to that versus dead strategy where it's, we know this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. Customer needs. A live strategy evolves with the customer. Dead strategy is static. How much of the customer is reflected in your strategy? Do you have anecdotes from your customers in your strategy to just give people an idea of this is what's happening on the ground? If not, it's a great way of involving them. And purpose. What's the purpose? What are we here for? Why are we here? Why is it important? What's the stake? Right? If it's not clear to people why we're committing all these resources and time and energy, right? People just lose the plot. So, is my strategy alive or dead? Checking the reference on our documents lets us know how often people are using them. Right? So when you leave here, check your references. And strategy is more likely to be used when they factor in course correction, change, ecosystem determination, customer needs, and purpose. When you leave here, just pick one of these to try and add to your strategy and see what change it makes, especially when you do the things in the next section. So next action, check in on your documents, see who's using them. If no one is, don't freak out. It's just an opportunity to work through the other 6 criteria and to do some of the things we're about to talk about shortly in order to find out. Again, our job is to make decisions easier for the people that we work with. We're there to make them easier and more clear. That's our job as product managers. Our last section, how do we build on our strategy? Bridge Associates did a white paper on how much do people talk about strategy. Remember the numbers we had earlier, 90% of those strategies fail? Well, only 48% of teams talk about strategy at least once a quarter. Right? There's a correlation there because our strategy is built through contact. Right? Dwight Eisenhower has a quote that is often repeated, that no plan survives first contact with the enemy. Plans don't, but strategy is the opposite. It's more towards what writer Nassim Taleb talks about when he talks about anti-fragility, which is things that gain through chaos and disorder. And so our strategies are tools that help us maneuver through chaos. They need contact. They need to feel what the outside world is. They need to know if they're right or wrong, and we need to adjust them. And so here are some tactics that we can use in order to get people involved. Highlight them in your meetings. And let's say this quarter, how many folks have talked about their strategy in a sprint? Some sprint anything. You got 1, 2, 3 folks, 4 folks, say 5% of the room, right? How much are people going to know about your strategy if you don't talk about it, right? You don't talk about it regularly. So think about taking some time during a sprint planning meeting to just take 5 minutes and say, this is our strategy, this is our why, this is what we're doing it for. How can we adjust or fail? Hands up if you've heard of pre-mortems before. 1, 2. You raise your hand a lot. Don't talk to me, talk to him. Pre-mortems are basically a way for you to get in front of potential problems. You gather folks in the room and you go, this problem, our strategy fails in 6 months. Why did it happen? Right? And so you'll get an idea of what people are thinking, and this may give you a sense of the risks that are there, right? And you can go back and you can add those risks, and people can see themselves reflected in the document. If you add people from other parts of the business, marketing, sales, right, you're starting to reflect the ecosystem that we've been talking about. How clear are we about our numbers? OKRs. OKRs are a sore subject. A lot of people do them wrong. I don't have enough time to go into why. But if you read folks like Christina Watke, who is tremendous on this subject, right, she will give you insight on how to do them right. One of the things I like about really good OKRs is they make our numbers very clear. They make the tactical very clear for teams in a way that helps teams grasp on to what the next step is. So that's the way. Sanity checks. Retros, hands up if you've done a retro this quarter. Better, like 40% of the room. Need that to be 100%. I take this even further. I like to run retros at least once a month, probably once every 2 weeks, and then also at the end running a quarterly retro, which is a quarterly retro gives you space to think about the quarter as a whole with the team. You take about 90 minutes, you build a timeline, and you really go into what are the big things that have happened over the last quarter. What do we need to adjust? What do we need to do better? What do we need to stop, right? This is a perfect time to talk about strategy as well, because you'll have an opportunity to say, this is the strategy, this is what we did, right? And this is how we do better. Appreciate people. Highlight wins in public announcements. Highlight Engineer 7 that did something. Highlight a designer that did something amazing. Do this regularly, right? This is how you build champions of the team that you're working with. And then also, if you expand that out, if you talk about a customer support person that did something amazing, now people are really starting to pay attention, right? They see that you're on top of what's happening in the ecosystem. And again, they see themselves reflected in the work that you do. All right, so how are you going to bring strategy to the room? Pick one of these, you have 2 minutes, and talk about how you're going to use it in the next quarter. See you in 2 minutes. I'll leave this up. Music is. That's not bad. We're at 10 minutes. 10 minutes. $30 seconds. All right, time. Stand up if you can hear me. Stand up if you can hear me. Stand up. Stand up. Okay, great. Perfect. All right, have a seat. Have a seat. Have a seat. Get out of here. Already. Okay, so hopefully in those 2 minutes you talked about how to build contact with your team, how to build bridges, right? One of the 6 things that I had up there, great tool to start. And then you can add tools like a lean coffee or pre-mortem. I didn't talk about lean coffee. Really quickly, lean coffee is when you bring folks, hopefully different stakeholders into the room, you give them a 5-minute preamble about what's happening, and then they write on notepads or Post-its what their questions or comments are. Everybody votes, and then you discuss. And so that gives folks in the room an opportunity to talk about things that you may not have thought about. In that 5 minutes, great time to talk about the problem, the stakes, and what are the big risks coming up. Right? And so add strategy to a meeting, right? Find a sprint planning meeting, a sprint retrospective, something that happens on a sprint demo, right? All of these are different ways in which to communicate your strategy to the team and then help them do what they to do strategically. Again, because our job as product managers is to help our teams make better decisions over time. Now, you should know how you can identify a strategy, right? You should know how to identify a strategy, which is basically how do you identify the problem. You can identify if a strategy is alive or dead, right? What are the 6 things? Have they used it? Have you engaged with them? And you have some tactics that'll help you use your strategy, right? Product management is not a solo sport. And so it's really important that you bring people into the room. Strategic custody is the art of keeping strategy alive, open to change, and operational. You don't want your strategy to end up here. All right, thank you. So that's the talk. If you are so inclined, please give me feedback. Take the picture of the QR code and fill things out. And while we do that, we'll get set up for questions and Q&A.
Exactly. Thank you. Adam, thank you so much for this beautiful presentation, the amazing Adam Thomas. We have a few questions coming from Slido.
Sure.
The first one being, how long and detailed should a strategy be?
Oh, everybody's got their drinks because it depends. I think generally when I think about strategy, I think about it in the time frame of 6 to 18 months, right? Anything less than that, you're thinking tactically, you're thinking about OKRs on a quarterly basis. But anything further than 18 months, there's no way that you can reconcile risks and bets, right? Technology changes. Like 18 months is essentially a generation in technology. So you can't go much further than that. So between 6 to 18 months is the time frame in which you should look at strategy in a tech perspective.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, any advice on how to align product strategy and tech strategy, considering dependencies and that the same resources are to implement both even across teams?
So the first thing I would do is, oh, there we go.
The
The first
second.
thing hello. The first thing I would do is get a list of those resources. What resources are we talking about, right? And then I would get really clear about what the problem that we're trying to solve is. And then I would get the people who are making these decisions, first I would talk to them separately to get a sense of where they are, what they think is happening, and then present what is actually happening, right? With product strategy and tech strategy, okay, we have these things happening, right? This can't stand, we can't do all of these things, right? So we need to be clear about what problems that we're trying to solve, right? Through our tech strategy. I'm assuming by tech strategy, they probably mean infrastructure engineering strategy, architectural strategy, something along those lines. And our product strategy, right? Which is going to inform which. And essentially, it's an operation on trying to get things in order, because if you have an overrun of resources, it points to me that people don't know what the resources are. They don't know what the resources are, and they don't know, to use an engineering term, what the throughput is for those resources.
Awesome. I have time for one more question. Could you list a few historical examples of actual dead product strategies? Thank you, Gergo, for the question.
Dead product strategies. There's a lot. Let's see. What I'm trying to do is I'm not trying to cheat and pick products that don't exist. It's pretty difficult. I think Google is a good example of a lot of dead product strategy, in fact. Google's chat strategy is a dead product strategy generally, right? Let's look at Google and look at their chat ecosystem. I bet you if I asked everybody in this room to give me the number of chat products that Google has, we'd all get different answers. Right? Have you heard of Duo before? Chat, Hangouts, right? It's clearly not a cohesive plan on what they're trying to do, right? Google has a dead product strategy because it has way too much money, and they do not have clarity on what they're trying to go after, which is leading to a really bloated portfolio. Dead strategy is when you look at really big companies like IBM, Google, Amazon, right? You'll see a lot of dead product strategy because unlike most folks here, I'm assuming, that don't work for those companies. If you do, you probably know what I'm talking about. But if you don't, right, you don't have a million things. You don't have a bajillion dollars and a bunch of smart people to work on things, right? You have a couple of smart people, maybe $1 million or $2 million to work on things. And so one of the outputs of bad product strategy or dead product strategy is excess. And so when you look at big companies, you see a lot of excessive product lines, right? That's an example of dead strategy.
Thank you so much. Let's join hands for Adam Thomas.
Thank you.